Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I want to talk about another important area to those people involved with radionics and consciousness machines. Well, one of the things that is rarely discussed in this area, like everything else when it really comes down to something of value in this area, is actually tuning your machine, dialing the dials, getting the rates in there, which is critically important if you're going to be successful, especially if you're working on difficult cases and situations. This all becomes a big, giant problem if you're unable to tune properly, and tuning can be very difficult and very draining. Now, tuning really comes down to the fact of getting the right numbers on the dials, and of course, you have to do this correctly. Do you know the flow of your machine? I mean, basically, you have what I call the in plate, and you have an out plate. Now, the energies go in the in plate, obviously, and out the out plate, which is how the wiring should be set in your machine. The dials should then be dialed in the way they flow through the machine. 1 should connect to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, etc. And the last dial should connect to the out plate. I mean, that's how things are. And you have to dial in that because that's the flow of energy. So how do you get these particular rates? And we're going to, depending on your machine and everything else, or what you put in the machine, how the rates you put in are all very interesting. So, excuse me, and this is dependent upon the manufacturer to a large extent of how all this works and how you tune it in and so forth. We're not going to get into that right now because there are differences, but we want to talk about the general tuning and flow. Now, the common way is to use, if it doesn't have one, is to use your out plate as kind of what's called a rubbing plate. There's usually a rubbing plate as well, and this is where a lot of older radionic, and this is where you're rubbing your finger back and back and forth. Usually it's over some sort of rubberized finish of some sort. It was kind of a rubberish coating or a plasticky type coating initially. In a lot of machines. Other machines used a type of wood that was actually varnished, I guess you could say, where you do the same thing, because this certain wood, I'm trying to remember what wood it actually was, had some capacity to give you what's called the stick. So a stick plate is where you run your fingers back and forth over it, and when you come to the right setting on a dial, you feel kind of a grabbing of your finger. So, this is called the rubbing plate. This can be, if you don't have a rubbing plate on your unit, you can also use your out plate, which has a similar effect. It doesn't really matter. There's nothing magical about or special about a rubbing plate. It's just a plate that's usually easily accessible on your machine, usually on the bottom and the centers, just easy to get to. While you're turning the dial with your left hand to find the number, you're moving your finger with the right hand. And that's the correct way to do it, even if you're left-handed, because energy flows through the left out the right, no matter what dominant hand you have. And there's a lot of lefties out there now. So this is something that should be understood. And important because your bioelectric flow through your body is important. So when you take energy in and you're going to filter it out through a rubbing plate, meaning it means you have to touch it with your left hand. It goes through your body out your right, because your right is now going to serve as not a sensing or drawing. The energy is coming out there for you can use it with a rub plate. So, as I said, you can also use any out. So your out plate could serve as a out plate as well. As a rubbing plate, I should say. And you slowly go through each number. Of course, when you're doing this rubbing thing, the reason why this became popular and is used a lot is that you can move very quickly. And this was probably incorporated into machines by a lot of practitioners who were actually using these machines by the hundreds in some place. From what I understand, Ruth Drown, who was very popular in the treating people with radionics, had hundreds of these machines in certain rooms and buildings because you can only use these machines for one person at one time. You can't multi-use most machines. So by unable to do that, you have to have an individual machine for everyone. So it means if you had to tune in a more elaborate way, this would make it very difficult to do any kind of volumes of patients. And again, whether it's right or wrong, well, it is wrong because you're not getting the same kind of tuning, even if you're a professional. I guess you could if you're very, very careful with it, but it doesn't give you the kind of information that you can get tuning a radionic machine using the best way, which is using a pendulum. So you go back and forth, and this is a way to do it, and then you tune the dial. So when you get a stick, that's the number. Now, the problem with this, as I said, it becomes much more general. You could be more specific by what you're supposed to do in general in the process. So if you were to land on 5 and this was a good stick, you would then turn it up to 6 and see if it unstuck. You would go down to 4 and see if it unstuck, then go back to or go down to 5, then go back to 6 to see if that is the real stick. Now, that's the proper way to get a rate. You want to check it, not just, okay, that's it. Because when you're doing things particularly quickly like this, you have to double check it, and you want to fine tune it. So, and of course, then you'd go on to the next dial in order. So if you're on 1, you go to 2, and make sure your machine, you know the flow of your machine. Your dials generally should be numbered, not only the numbers on the dials, but the dial itself should be numbered. Is this 1, is this 2, etc. What is the flow of energy through the machine? Very, very important, because that's how they. So if your machine is wired strange or some bizarre way, and you're not getting the flow of energy through it properly, well, it won't work right. Plain and simple as that. So it's important to actually understand that. So that's the common way of doing things using stick plates, because it's very easy to do and quick. It is not efficient, and it's not good in the long run. Maybe a practitioner can do this, but I'm not sure how good it is. But maybe if you do hundreds of people and you're doing this all the time, that you can whiz through these things. But generally, it's not. Every person is different. Now, the problem with rates in general is you get a rate, and there's rate books floating around for different types of problems, etc., of all from healing to metaphysical uses. And are these rates any good? Well, these rates were determined by somebody else. For whom? Themselves? Some other person? Is your rate the same? Well, ballpark rates are the same, kind of. So prosperity energy is prosperity energy? Well, I differ in this area. While I do think there is a certain gross aspect to it, your prosperity rate, your rate to solve any particular problem, whether that be vibrational energy healing or metaphysical type uses, success, love, etc., well, they're different. You have individual energy rates. Would a general money drawing rate work for you over your specific rate? Yes. This is what tends to work. So, success energy is success energy, and it will work on anybody to a degree. Do you want something that produces even higher levels, that's customized to you? Well, that's right. You should get your own rates. So your prosperity rate ultimately is unique from someone else's. So you have to keep that in mind if you're trying to really be successful and do it 100% right. You should get your own rates for everything. Now, pre-made up rates and other things is what everybody likes, because tuning your machines is a pain. Tuning 9 dials, which is a common amount of dials that people have, is very difficult in terms of time consuming. And when you're doing these trainings, whether you're using the stick method or the better way, using a pendulum, and we'll get into that in a minute, it takes a lot of time and is draining. It's surprisingly draining because you're using core energies. Core energies are very high energetic levels because you're tapping into something that is way out of the common energetic realm. So, tuning a machine can actually be very fatiguing afterwards. You can actually feel very tired because you've used this higher energy that you're not accustomed to using. And this is the core energy that keeps you going. So that in itself is quite interesting. So tuning things can be very stressing. So everybody just wants, well, I'll plug this in. What's the vibrational energy healing rate for this condition? Which the general rate will give you some results, but a specific rate for you. What is the healing rate for this particular problem for me? And your picture's on there, and it should be, if you're tuning in for something that, let's say, is a new problem. Let's say you hurt your knee, or recently I got stung by a bunch of bees. I had a picture of myself now, when this happened, to actually affect my physical condition now. And these are all the little things that are very important. And people say, well, I don't get results. Well, a lot of stuff you're not doing right. It's not all that simplistic. Now, you can use general rates. You can use a lot of the templates that we have, all the things that will be coming out very soon to use this boost. And this is what a lot of people do. And there are so many ways of boosting the energies going into you that are more general in nature. And we'll go into those things as well. But, you have to do things correctly. And there are many aspects, which I'm not going to get into, how to get lots of energy into the machine, which you have to use lasers, all sorts of things that happen instead of all the backward ways that are being used now. And people wonder why things don't work too well. So when you're doing this tuning, let's get back to that. The best way to do tuning is to use a pendulum. So you're holding the pendulum over the out plate. Did you get that? That's where the energy is flowing out. So when you're tuning a dial, you want to make sure that you are holding the pendulum over where the energy is coming out, because that's affecting the flow of it. When you have multi-dials, that's going to be different rates because of the multi-dials. So you're on. So you go and you jump. Now, the best way is yes and no, which is clockwise is yes, counterclockwise is no. But to cut down the time, you tell the pendulum, your consciousness, that you only want the pendulum to move when it's yes. That's clockwise. So you go to number one. You say, is number one the correct rate or number for this first dial? You look at your pendulum. Now, when you do this enough, it should move very quickly. So if it's staying there like a stone dead, well, is it 2? Is it 3? And you keep going up until that pendulum starts to swing clockwise. Now, here again, the one thing nice about pendulums is you can generally tell how strong the energy is. Because when it starts to spin, you can see how gross the spin is. Is it going like a helicopter, which is, wow, look at the energy? Or is it just barely moving? This is a way to ascertain if 5 is good. Is 6 better if they both move clockwise? Generally, they don't. But you can inch things up, and if you have a 0 to 100 dial, maybe it's 61, 62 instead of 6. That's the one benefit of using 0 to 100 dials, but I'll tell you, it's difficult to tune these. Now, we'll get into that in other ones, but this makes it even more work. But you don't go through each number, you get to the area and then you fine-tune it. But you want to fine-tune it as well. So let's say you get a spin on 5. You move the dial up to 6 and you say, is this? Now, if 5 is correct, 6 should say no. And it can, again, you can have it swing counterclockwise, or as I do, no movement. Because if you swing each way, it takes a lot longer, and you're not really gaining anything. So you go down to 4. Is 4 the right number? And again, you should have no movement or get a no. You go back to 5 as 5. Now you should get a move. Now I do this all the time, and this is a great way of proving the number and really even proving the technology. Because if you're getting spins on a whole bunch of numbers, well, what does that mean? That means you're doing it wrong. So if you get to 5 and you get a yes, Well, unless you're, as I said, dealing with going up in that area, meaning you're on 50 and want to find out if 51 is a little better or a little worse, it's still the same process. But the whole idea is that in many instances that's not required, and really, that's professional tuning, and we have modulars for that. But the average tuning, I'm not sure people need that. But you can check your work that way, just as you should do if you're using a stick. If you get 5 on a stick, well, check 6. 6 should not be a stick. Neither should 4. So that's how you check your stuff, and that's how you get proper rates. And then you, of course, go to the next dial. Don't jump around. You go from 1 to 2, and that could be sideways. Some units go up and down. So make sure your dials are... the flow of your dials. They're either numbered, and I do recommend with some people, if you're not really sure, and they're not numbered well, to open your box and look at the flow of wiring. But that may not be practical with some units, but your unit should be marked. As I said, not just the dials from 1 to 10, the dials themselves should have a number on them or above them. This is dial 1. If they don't, you're in trouble. If you don't have as one unit that has been highly marketed as of recently, they don't have any marks on there. It doesn't say 1, 2, 3, 4. You're supposed to guess that because they made a real cheapy thing up, putting it in a crappy little box. I mean, the garbage that's out there in the radionic field that people are buying is really pathetic. But of course, they have no background. They know nothing. They know nothing about any kind of construction or anything else. So this is a real problem. Of course, there are some that do, and there are some well-made and usually highly expensive units out there as well. I don't really have much to say about their guts of the items because the internal aspects of most of these machines are pathetic as well. So when you get involved in all these things, what does this actually mean? So this is very technical, and you need to know how to tune your machines. But this is important when you're getting a machine. If your machine doesn't have their dials numbered, you've got a real problem here. If they don't have numbers of and just marks, well, what is in these people's minds? What a bunch of stooges. And that means everything else they do is stooges. So that's important to understand. So you go from one dial to the other and verify it in that fashion. The best way to do it and to check energies is with a pendulum. Because again, you have general information that you get. You can also go back in a few days. Now, once you've tuned something in over, and of course, everything is done over the out plate or the stick plate, you ask, are the rates on this machine still working? Now, as machines change and your situation changes, you may have to adjust your rates. And this, again, is something that you have to do. So the whole idea is that, and of course, your situation changes, your energy changes. And that's why it's so important to have your own instant, particularly guild camera, which will give you a very powerful witness photograph using the old Polaroid type technology, but highly empowered. As we put all sorts of tachyons, we put all sorts of other things on these units to give it greater empowerment so that your image is very energetic in nature and can be affected and give out information easily. But you need to use lots of new pictures. If you're doing new work on yourself, or if you've taken a picture of yourself a week ago, you have now changed, especially if you're working on yourself. If you're using actual radionic rates on yourself, after you have a healing rate going on you for a week or two, well, most likely that healing rate has to change. Now, part of the change should be the fact that you change the photo you're using, because now you have changed energetically. Now, in one fascinating aspect of this, some people have tried to change their lives by working with photographs of them as children or younger. I was well then, or I got this illness in this year that this photo was taken. Well, some people, and this is very advanced, fascinating, and very possible based in the understanding that everything is happening at once. Time and spaces means nothing to a consciousness practitioner, a manifesting scientist, a person using radionic consciousness machine. Time and space is nothing. So the whole idea is you could work on a photograph of yourself from 1980 where you got hurt or sick and heal yourself then, which could possibly have dramatic changes in your life now. Work on time travel fixing. Time travel empowerment. Isn't that a fascinating area? And that'll be a whole nother lecture unto itself. So, but when you're doing it, fine-tuning it, checking your rates. Is this still good? And if it says yes, you can ask to what percentage. Is this working 100% still? And you're going to find that this goes down every time you check your machine. So it may be only working at 50% capacity, and you may want to leave it there or not. You could then put a new rate in and get it working at a higher rate. And you're going to change. As you change, which usually takes a bit of time, by the way, generally things are not instantaneous. There's a lot of literature stating that it could take weeks or months on a radionic machine to cure you of some very terrible energetic situations, diseases, etc. So it just doesn't, it didn't work, I have it in 2 days. You ask, is it still working? So, no use changing rates if you're just going to keep changing rates. Well, that's no good. It takes time for everything to work. So you ask, is it still working? Plain and simple. So what does all that mean? It means all sorts of things. So you have to fine-tune things. So this is a process of working with consciousness radionic machines that few people cover. And this is also one reason why a lot of people are not getting great results with this. They aren't trained properly. They don't know all these ins and outs that we know of today of how to do these things better, how to get energy out there. But, these kind of energy machines, which haven't changed in over 120 years in general, they're all the same machines. They're all really poorly built. They're not amplified properly. There's no way of getting new information in them. So all of this stuff is the same. They're still based on the same in-played, out-played dials. Now, very little has changed from there. People don't understand amplification. They're trying to put in other things in the machine itself, giving it so-called accumulative energies. All of these things don't work. They're not good, and if they do work, they shouldn't really be internal. This should be something you add to your machine. So this is quite a different process than just what's happening now. So there's a lot of junk out there, which is what pretty much all the cheaper units are. There are some fairly well-built units out there. I mean, they're well-constructed, but the bottom line is that they tend to be very expensive, and there's really nothing special to them. But at least we assume that the guts of them are built fairly well. We just don't know without looking into them. And of course, nobody has any information on what their technology's done, even though they've been doing it for 20 or 30 years now, producing the same machine. So, and of course, I've done some lectures on this, and there is reasons for this because of legalities, etc. So you just can't come out and tell people you're doing this, you're doing that. These are making claims, and it puts you in. But, I mean, there's really no even anecdotal information out there that anybody produces. And, customer testimonials is not good information. Somebody has to test this at credibility, not somebody that your buddy liked it. And I've heard this from a lot of people. They're in love with something one month, and the next month they hate it. So what all that means is very difficult to get the bigger picture. And the only reason people are making this stuff out there is for profit. They're not trying to help anybody. They're not trying to do anything else. Well, the technology may help people, but their goal is to make money, and they're not really doing much past that. Their units are overpriced. Their help is menial. They've been doing this for years. They're filling their pockets, thinking they're helping people, and maybe they are. And of course, this technology it does help people, even with these poorly made machines and everything else, because they're very psychically based. They're psychic tuners, so they do help you regardless of how cheap and junky they are. It's just the nature of what these are. So All of that needs to be taken into consideration. But tuning is critically important, and you need to take some time to do it right. So if you're tuning a machine, make sure you're doing it properly and so forth. As I said, I'm not a big fan of sticking. Sticking is way too subjective. Was that a strong... Oh, I know my stick. Well, whatever. If you like your stick, that's fine, but you better be fine-tuning your rates that you're getting sticks on. As I've mentioned, you do the technique I just gave you. But as I said, I don't like it, and it's going to be difficult to measure, quantify something in terms of what percentage is this machine working. Now, I guess you can do that rubbing, say, is it 80, is it 1, and see if you get it. So, but as I said, personally, I find that just way too subjective of a stick. If you like it, if you feel you've got very good information because you sensitize yourself to it, well, then you use it. And of course, that's everything in life. What is the best technique? The one that works for you, plain and simple. Everything is subjective, and what a teacher does is supposed to give you a general way of doing things. That general way of doing things, you specifically find the way that works for you, not the way the teacher did it. They're giving you ballpark understandings, but you want to do it what works best for you, because this is what life's all about. High performance, extreme abilities doesn't come from following what it says in a book. You're interpreting that information. I try and pound this into people's heads. That's what all life is about. You use information that you interpret so that it works better for you, or stimulates or give you ideas on how to do things better to higher levels for you personally. So hopefully that's clear. Until next time.